Hopes for a less dangerous world rose slightly in June 1979, when President Carter met with Soviet leader Leonid Brezhnev in Vienna to sign the long-stalled SALT II agreements. These agreements were the result of many nagging issues still left over from the SALT I Treaty signed in May of 1972. Though the SALT I Treaty limited a wide variety of nuclear weapons, many issues remained unresolved. SALT II further limited the levels of lethal strategic weapons in the Soviet and American arsenals. Conservative critics of the president's defense policies unsheathed their long knives to carve up SALT II Treaty when it came to the Senate in 1979. Political earthquakes in the petroleum-rich Persian Gulf region finally buried all hopes of ratifying the SALT II Treaty. On November 4, 1979, a mob of passionately anti-American Muslim militants stormed the United States Embassy in Tehran and took occupants hostage. Captors then demanded that the American authorities ship back to Iran the exiled Shah, who had arrived in the U.S. 2 weeks earlier for medical treatment. World opinion hotly condemned the diplomatic felony Iran. Americans agonized over both the fate of the hostages and the stability of the entire Persian Gulf region, which was dangerously close to the Soviet Union. The Soviet army then aroused the West's worst fears on December 27, 1979, when it blitzed into the mountainous nation of Afghanistan, next door to Iran, and appeared to be poised for a thrust at the oil jugular of the Gulf. President Carter reacted vigorously. He slapped an embargo on the export of grain and high-technology machinery to the USSR and called for a boycott of the upcoming Olympic Games in Moscow. He proposed the creation of a rapid deployment force to respond to suddenly developing crises in faraway places and requested that young people be made to join. The president proclaimed that the United States would, quote, use any means necessary, including force, to protect the Persian Gulf against the Soviet incursions. He grimly conceded that he had misjudged the Soviets and that the SALT II Treaty had become a dead letter in the Senate. Meanwhile, the Soviet army met unexpectedly stiff resistance in Afghanistan and bogged down in a nasty, decade-long guerrilla warfare that came to be called Russia's Vietnam. The United States provided $2 billion over 10 years in support of the Afghan regime. The Iranian hostage crisis was Carter's and the United States' bed of nails. The captured Americans languished in cruel captivity, while the nightly television news broadcasts in the United States showed humiliating scenes of Iranian mobs burning the American flag and spitting on the effigies of Uncle Sam. In the case of Nicaragua, the focus was on destabilizing the government and engineering the overthrow of the Marxist-oriented Sandinista regime. A portion of the $48 million that Iran paid for the arms was diverted by the NSC and given to Las Contras battling el gobierno sandinista de Nicaragua.
At first, Carter attempted to apply economic sanctions and world public opinion as pressure against the Iranians, while hoping for the emergence of a stable government with which to negotiate. However, the political turmoil in Iran continued, frustrating Carter in his presidency. At last, Carter ordered a bold rescue mission. A highly trained commando team were to go in and penetrate deep into Iran's sandy interior. This plan would require perfect timing to come out on top. If there were any equipment failures, the mission had to be abandoned. As the commandos withdrew in the dark desert night, 2 of their aircrafts collided, killing 8 of the would-be rescuers. This disastrous failure in the rescue mission was displayed as a huge embarrassment in the national honor. This stalemate with Iranians made Carter's remaining term difficult and provided as an embarrassing backdrop for Carter's re-election. As the 1980 presidential race approached, a discontented and divided public looked to close the book on a frustrating decade. The long post-war boom and the broadly shared prosperity that accompanied it were gone for good, to be replaced in coming decades by more fitful and less equitable spurts of economic growth. An ascendant conservative movement helped to popularize far-reaching critiques of government activism, as well as new arguments on behalf of free market policies. Economic inequality and political polarization alike grew steadily in the decades to come. The dawning era of dampened economic growth, governmental paralysis, and widening income disparity also witnessed increasing tolerance and inclusion for racial and ethnic minorities, immigrants, gays and lesbians, and women, all of whose horizons broadened dramatically in the decades ahead. U.S. Attorney General Edwin Meese admitted on November 25th that profits from weapons sales to Iran were made available to assist the Contra rebels in Nicaragua. On the same day, John Poindexter resigned, and President Reagan fired Oliver North. Although it is certain that Reagan condoned the sale of missiles for hostages in Iran, there is no evidence that the president knew that Oliver North was diverting money from the missile sales to the Nicaraguan Contras. Some people blamed Reagan's hands-off administrative style as a contributing factor in Iran-Contra. Reagan concerned himself with big-picture strategy in domestic and foreign policy, but this administrative approach seemed to lead to serious consequences in the Iran-Contra affair. Reagan earned the nickname the Teflon President since scandals never seemed to stick to him and his popularity with the public remained unchanged. Both the sale of arms to Iran and the military aid to the Contras were illegal. Colonel Oliver North and others in the president's administration were dismissed and charged with breaking the law.